I've ever been scrolling online and felt like everyone has lost their minds. One minute, everyone's laughing at a meme. The next, they're locked into a bizarre, paranoid rage over something you've never heard of. It's not just you. And it's not an accident. We're living in a world that has been intentionally designed to make us paranoid. Not by an elite cabal, a government, or an Illuminati, but by people like you and me. People just trying to sell ideas and products to each other. And today, we're going to investigate how this happened. This topic started for me with the issue with Sydney Sweeney, the American Eagle controversy. It popped up on my feed and it wouldn't go away. At first, I just wrote it off as just more female jealousy, catty women who don't like Sydney Sweeney for whatever reason, and that instead of them calling each other whores or whatever they would do normally to ruin a woman's reputation, they were calling this woman a Nazi. And that was a sufficient enough explanation for me for a while. With feminism, for example, you can't slut shame. So this new Jezebel word for them would be a racist, a Nazi. In today's day and age, our archetype for the devil is Hitler. So this all sort of made sense to me. But what started as a fringe complaint spiraled into a full-blown social contagion, something happening almost exclusively among women. It had all the hallmarks of a classic moral panic, but it was just one of many weird things going on. Shortly after, you had the Charlie Kirk incident, with both sides treating this as a cultural war event and the left flipping out and celebrating the event. Each side reporting selective facts about what happened. And it felt like everyone, and still feels like, everyone's living in a different reality. It turns out we may just be. One of my favorite philosophers on YouTube is a guy named Plastic Pills. And I had stumbled upon a video that he had made during this period called Why Has America Gone Insane? And it connected a lot of dots for me. Plastic Pills is a radical left philosopher. He puts out amazing content, and even though I disagree with many of his positions, I always learn a lot from him, and, like ContraPoints, find his work exceptionally well researched, inspiring, and stimulating. In the video called Why Has America Gone Insane?, he was discussing the origins of propaganda. And I later started seeing the things he was talking about happening in real time. And I would like to further develop upon the ideas that he had begun, because I believe they're both poignant and something that is evidently manifesting before us. His argument is simple but shocking. The insanity we see today is a direct consequence of over a century of public relations and propaganda deliberately engineering our reality. So, in short, his argument, as I understood it, is that the constant propaganda for the last 100 years, that is, mass media propaganda, is a neglected cause for explaining many of our social ills, especially regarding epistemology, where we try to understand what is true, not just in the news itself, but about reality itself. What is good and bad? What is human? What is a good life? We, evolutionarily speaking, are kind of new to all this propaganda as a species. In his argument, he says that it's made us, to some degree, schizo. Not in a full clinical sense of it, but it has forced our minds into patterns of thinking which we must constantly distrust reality around us and see hidden agendas in every form of information about the world and the societies we live in. We are constantly having our emotions and our parasympathetic nervous systems provoked and manipulated, creating these automatic reactions from us, in part to subvert our rational faculties of judgment and critical analysis, and then to have this combined with dopamine intoxications through fantasies and addictions. Some to sell us new products, others utopian political solutions, and still others to just keep us using the same product. Due to this, it's become a rational response to treat everything around us as predatorial, calculating, and having ulterior motives, often malicious, or at least with motives that we have not rigorously considered in participating in. This subconscious manipulation developed within the last 100 years, starting with the application of Freudian psychology, so that propaganda has, in our age, acquired scientific grounding. This we're going to call new propaganda to distinguish it from industrial age propaganda. And due to the Enlightenment, its application of scientific method to everything, those methods have been applied to mass media. Applied psychology has become a science. This mass media has been increasingly enhanced by scientific developments in psychology, sociology, and mass media as a discipline itself. Together, This has been combined with a century of psyops methods being developed from both world wars and the Cold Wars. And those skills have been filtering down into public use. For the record, there is no laws against using psyops on other citizens. It's only when a government uses psyops on the citizens that we have laws against this. So, plastic pills will use a Lacanian Bouillard framework to model what is taking place. His framework he calls the Three Americas. And the Three Americas are used to understand this disconnect from reality. He has based the Three Americas, from what I can see, upon a modified kind of Lacanian psychology and the Lacanian model of the consciousness. I'm not going to go too much into Lacan. He's a very difficult thinker, but in this context, not too difficult to comprehend. So, first we have the imaginary. That is imaginary America. This is the idealized, almost mythical version of a nation. We saw this in the development of 90s films as a place where the leaders are fundamentally competent and unite us in times of crisis to overcome challenges together. This is the America of aspirational belief. I think the easiest example of it would have been movies like Armageddon and Independence Day. Then you have hyperreality. So hyperreality America is the America that's inhabited by those who believe in this imaginary America. They're the ones who live out this fantasy. Now, maybe another way to understand this is something like Instagram or The Bachelor. These are examples Plastic Pills uses in his other videos, where Instagram is a copy of a copy of a copy. Right? There's the original event that takes place. You go see a wonderful show, or you go see a wonderful environment, and then there's the copy of it. You go to a place that other people have taken pictures of and take a picture of yourself in that place. And then there's the copy of the copy. And that's when it is so lost track with the original that you Photoshop yourself into it in order to impress people. This is the America that is inhabited by those who believe in the imaginary America. They still see it as a tangible reality. So these are the people who would be living in almost a LARPing version of America, sort of like Disneyland's ideal city or an ideal 1950s America scenario where everything that doesn't fit into the ideology or into the understanding of America is blocked out. Plastic Pills and other videos talks about this in the TV series The Bachelor, where you have a copy of a copy. And so you have the original event, someone getting married, and then you have the copy of it, which would be someone staging an event of getting married. You know, you put on the dress, you do the proposal, you put this very idyllic idea of what getting married is about. You know, roses are involved, everyone's manicured to the best, right? And then you have a copy of the copy of the copy. So you've totally lost track of reality now. You're no longer referencing the original reality, you're referencing the copy. And so all of the meaning gets dissolved away, and all there is this simulacrum. I would argue that we could even extend this to what's happened with the boomers and the hippie revolution. They still live in a simulacrum of a revolution where they believe they've saved America and are the champions of history. They can't let go of that myth that they overcame fascism for a generation. Although what they overcame was not fascism. What they overcame was neo-fascism, which was a simulacrum of fascism. It was a copy of fascism invented by academics. It was not a historical event that took place, but an abstraction from the historical event, which removed all of the left-wing inconveniences that came with fascism and turned it into a right-wing system. So this neo-fascism, or fascism, as coined by Umberto Eco, is not actual historical fascism. And so overcoming this copy of a fascism allows them to live out this idealized version of themselves as American saviors. This would be sort of like the Disney version of fascism you'd find in The Lion King, and overcoming that. So this version of fascism leaves out all the other historical events that were taking place, like the Soviet expansion of left-wing totalitarianism. Then we have reality itself, the real reality, or the obscene. In the Zizek sense. The obscene America is the America of the present day. It's the America that neither one of these imaginary or hyper-real America is sufficient to make sense of. And so the inability for this hermeneutics of meaning, these ideologies of meaning to try to understand reality, cause a leftover. They cause a surplus of things of data that has to be somehow accounted for. And so that's when we get stuff like conspiracy theories and fake news, and then we get into these crises of democracy where no one could really agree what's happening because everybody's got to deal with surplus facts that they can't make sense of in their ideology. So it's a landscape where public figures are often driven more by ratings than by a clear, consistent set of beliefs or ideals. And this is the reality America that we can't put into these hermeneutics or into these frameworks. It's too obscene. It's too traumatic. It's something that drugs, orgies, and rock and rolls of the 60s won't solve, nor will your Black Lives Matter little neither will your Black Lives Matter avatar on your Facebook do anything to operate, do anything to mitigate. These are merely symbolic gestures talking to a symbolic world rather than dealing with the real world as it is. So these are imaginary structures which we've created to try to make sense of the world and cope with the world. Now, as a side note for homework, I would highly recommend the BBC series, The Century of the Self, and of course the Plastic Pills video, which I'll reference in the data below. So I think both these will really help you understand the role of advertising, which has created a century of developing new methods to manipulate the public on a mass media level. So if you take something, an easy example like cellulite, this is something that's more or less invented. It was made to make you feel insecure about body fat, normal body fat, and then sell you something as a solution in a bottle. But a century of successfully doing this didn't stop with selling beauty products. It was applied to news, politics, and ideologies. So who started all this? Well, Plastic Pills will identify it was Ivy Lee who pioneered the techniques to manipulate the public's perception for the belief of the corporate world and the industrial interests. So again, these people are using psychological techniques and rebranding it as PR, and these are techniques that are used to create these imaginary worlds of what's happening, new hermeneutics to give you a heuristic to interpret the world by, and a means to cope with the world. So these are creating, manufacturing ideal worlds and hyper real worlds for you to live in. Ivy Lee, the father of the public relations, back in the early 1990s rebranded propaganda into PR and taught corporations how to control the public mind. His playbook was simple: reframe the narrative. So he turned the despised Robert Barons into respected captains of industry, control the information. He invented the press release, fled the media with positive stories, drowning out the negative ones. Target emotion, not reason. Lee knew audiences don't think, they feel. So he used symbols and emotional phrases to bypass critical thought. The next figure we'll briefly overview is Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays is the subject of the Century of the Self series, and he is the nephew of Sigmund Freud. Bernays took his uncle's ideas about the subconscious and applied them to the masses. He argued that an invisible government of elites must manipulate the public for society to function. He saw propaganda as necessary. One of his books, an easy read of about 150 pages, is called Propaganda. I'll put the link for it below too. And it presents the central argument that in a democratic society, the manipulation of public opinion by an intelligent minority is not only common but necessary. So, a few key concepts from the book we will go over: the invisible government and the organized society. Bernays argues that due to the complexity of modern life, individuals cannot be experts on everything. Therefore, the invisible government So, a few key concepts from the book: the invisible government and the organized society. Bernays argues that due to the complexity of modern life, individuals cannot be experts on everything. Therefore, the invisible government or thought leaders must be molders of opinions, and influential figures are necessary to sift through information and present it to the public and digest it for the public. So, this is a very useful way to outsource the labor of going through every product. Think about something like Consumer Report, that we need a little bit of this, and that's propaganda in the good sense that Bernays is trying to defend. It's impossible for you to know everything about every car, and so having someone do that research for you and present that information for you is a kind of propaganda. However, this is very easily abused because it's very limited to a group of people who are telling you everything. So they can bring in their own bias and their own agendas and start to change the information for their own benefits and incentives. Think stock market incentives, for example. If some car company is giving you a little kickback, you might change the way you feel about that. And then we get influencers today doing the same kind of thing, and they're going to sell you any nonsense that helps them get ahead. So these are propagandists, right? And they've got ulterior motives. This then is not necessarily a conspiracy, but an organic outcome of our societal structure. These leaders, through their understanding of mass psychology, guide public discourse and decision making. This is what we are calling new propaganda. So Bernays applied Freudian psychology to his work. He believed that to influence people, one must appeal to their unconscious desires and irrational emotions, not just to their rational minds. So this is what Bernays' knack is. He is able to understand the Freudian subconscious, which was a new development in psychology, in ways that no one else really had in the day. And he is doing an applied Freudian psychology to the masses and mass media. These techniques will later also be taken up by Reagan and Thatcher. Again, something you get from the Century of the Self. So a couple of examples from his book are the ivory soap sculpture competition, where he talks about ivory soap put on this competition, and I think they still do. And they put on a competition of making sculptures out of their soap. This helps advertise their soap, but it also helps you associate their soap with a kind of highfalutin activity. It's art now, right? You're going to museums and you're involved with culture. So you're no longer just dealing with soap. And that's what becomes a propaganda. You're now associating ivory soap with this very highfalutin behavior and with all the activities that you're having at the museum. And so it's now got connections to your memories and your Pavlovian responses. So he's engineered our desires by linking products to our deepest unconscious emotions. Think about, for example, McDonald's. They don't just sell you a burger, they've engineered your childhood. They've got that play place, which creates lifelong memories and a subconscious cravings for their brand. This is not by accident. It's a neurological pathway that they've built inside you. They've engineered your own neurology. So, after World War II, this science got even more sophisticated. We have what's known as the Tavistock Institute in Britain. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because if you want a conspiracy theory, the Tavistock Institute is rife with them. Everyone has a Tavistock conspiracy on YouTube. Just look up InfoWars if you want to have fun with Tavistock. But I'm going to try to keep it grounded. But they are definitely using psychology and research of psychology to help government agendas. It's led by psychologist from the British Army, and his goal was to use psychology to engineer a more mentally healthy and adjusted society. This was implemented using what's called the psychiatric fifth column. They trained psychiatrists and psychologists to infiltrate every pillar of society. That's education, politics, industry, and even religion. Their job wasn't to practice therapy, but to change the culture from inside out by subtly embedding psychological concepts into movies, TV shows, and the news. They became the quiet architects of our cultural narratives. Now, you can still see this today in magazines. Look at any women's magazine, and it's loaded with these kind of psychological babble that are trying to introduce you to this like healthier way of thinking. Conclusions. So, why does everyone seem so schizo? Well, for 100 years, the most powerful forces in our society have been using sophisticated psychological tools to make us that way. They've flattened reality into a 2D narrative, a brand, an advertisement. They've manipulated our neural pathways. They've taught us that our natural gut level instincts can be manipulated and that we should distrust them, and that living in this fake world is creating a alternate reality and a form of insanity that we have to navigate constantly. So this new psychological environment has every interest group and its advocates who are going to be dabbling in this level of psychology and using this stuff. Not to mention how much corporations are going to be using all manner of market research, aka psychological research, for the manipulation of the public. And we have arrived at this state mainly through the mercantile class, and further creating a mercantile society who is constantly propagandizing us with information about their own products, and then using those techniques into the manipulation of politics and entering themselves into the political class through lobbying, so that the political class too will eventually start using these as they mature. And then these techniques spread into the journalistic class. You have Fox News, CNN, whoever you want to say is making propaganda. These techniques are all being used by the journalists, which had been priorly developed by the advertisers. And then any successful techniques are going to spill over into journalistic efforts to get some kind of favored candidate into power. So they're calculating in their research, they're making propaganda which is intended to manipulate. So we are now permeating our psychological space with manipulation. We're giving our environment, our public space, to the highest bidder, like billboards, videos, and commercial propaganda. We're constantly under a kind of manipulative dystopia. We live in an environment of propaganda. And this fills up our peripheral of our consciousness with messages which we mostly can't trust. Camel cigarettes are really cool. High fructose corn syrup in Coke and in candy. That's what fun's all about, drinking Coke. Alcoholic benders as a vacation. So you can kind of push these ideas out and say, oh, well, I'm just living my own life. It's not affecting me if I don't want it to. Regardless, they're still constantly being fed to you. And if nothing else, you just know that you can't trust any of this stuff. And so that starts to put you into a more paranoid state about all of the information and messaging you're getting around you. So we, for the most part, do push this out and pursue our goals. But this propaganda continues to chatter away like voices in a schizo's brain. You're not wearing the new style. Your face isn't smooth enough. Your hair isn't shiny enough. You'd be more interesting and quirky if you had this signifier. Plastic Pills posits that the state of deep distrust becomes a logical position. Individuals are compelled to doubt not only the media, but even their own beliefs, which have possibly been engineered. Do you hold this political position, or have you been engineered to hold these positions? So this widespread paranoia leads to what's called, or what he calls, mass hysteria, a collective state where people reasonably start to believe in unseen forces, vast conspiracies, and hidden puppet masters controlling events. This is when we get into conspiracy theories. We see all kinds of indoctrination going on around us. And whether you're left, right, or whatever your positions are, you're going to start to try to postulate some sort of unseen source. It must be the lizard people. It must be QAnon. It must be the corporations. It must be the fascists or the Nazis. There always is someone who's behind the scenes doing this. And that's where things get rocky. And that's where things get sketchy. You see the effects and you see the reality. You see the effects and you see the reality of everything in front of us being manipulated, but you can't fully explain it. And so this leads you to think that there's one cabal. You want to have a simple, unified answer. One group that's doing all the manipulation. But knowing how the tricks work is the first step to breaking this schizo dystopia that came with mass media. The real battle is not left versus right, or this celebrity versus that one. It's about reclaiming your own mind from the people who want to rent it out. What I'm arguing is this. I don't think it's one group, and I think it's dangerous to attribute it to one group. I think it's hundreds and hundreds of groups constantly manipulating you, some being more successful than others. But there's no grand design. There's no grand plan. We're just in a mishmash chaos of all this. We're in this environment where reality is known to be manufactured. Believing in a hidden reality is not an act of psychosis, but a kind of logical adaptation. You've become schizo in order to live in this environment. So ultimately, Plastic Pills video concludes that in a world where your deepest beliefs and desires might be the product of PR campaigns, behaving in a way that appears insane is paradoxically a pretty reasonable response. This is adaptation. This is our mind trying to harden itself to the reality of things going on around us where we can't trust anything around us. So, the next time that you feel a wave of online panic or outrage, ask yourself, who benefits from me feeling this? Or before you post an online rant to YouTube video or a tweet, ask, am I getting paid to do this? Because your engagement is making the provocateur money. It's a quagmire. The more you express yourself in rants and rage, the more you further the opinions that you're fighting, because it feeds the algorithm.